Welcome back to EBC's 21-day fast in the Unshakable series. My name is Gaynete Jones, and today's devotional is entitled Shaken But Not Stirred, Daniel in the Lion's Den. So the verse for today is pulled from Daniel chapter 6, verse 23b. And in the NKJV it reads, "So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him because he believed in his God." The story of Daniel in the lion's den is such a popular one that if we aren't careful, we could breeze through it because we've heard it so many times. And in doing so, we miss the little but profound messages that are sprinkled throughout. So yes, of course, it's a story of God's faithfulness and Daniel's boldness, but it's also a story that shows us what God's divine favor looks like, and also what it looks like with the side effects of jealousy from that divine favor. It also shows us what it looks like to stand on godly convictions, to stand on God's business, and to truly live our life out loud for the Lord. And the reality is, each of us face our own lion's den situations. Those moments where we have to decide whether we're truly going to be in the world but not of it. When we decide whether we're going to follow what the world's telling us to do or stand on our godly convictions and deal with the aftermath of that decision. And what we see in Daniel chapter 6 is that sometimes even choosing the correct side doesn't automatically remove you from the aftermath of that decision. Daniel still had to go to the lion's den. However, our God was with him in the midst of it. And while the governors and the satraps, which were the provincial leaders in Persia at the time, while they tried to shake Daniel's faith and ultimately take his life by throwing him in the den of lions, what they could not shake is his soul. And your soul is your mind, your will, and your emotions, because his soul stayed steadfast on the Lord. Daniel's world around him was shaken, but he remained unstirred. And what we see in today's verse from Daniel 6:23 is that it was actually Daniel's faith that saved him. He was saved because he believed in his God. You see, Daniel didn't just believe that God existed, but he believed that God could deliver him. And Yahweh showed up like he always does, and just like he did for his friends 3 chapters before in the fire, he showed up and he showed out. And that's because he is and will always be the same God. Same God that showed up for Daniel is the same God that will show up for you in your trial. And one of my favorite parts of Daniel in the lion's den story is actually from chapter 6, verses 10 and 11, where it shares that he knelt down as he typically did multiple times a day to pray and make supplication to his Lord and give thanks. And I loved that because it tells us that Daniel wasn't new to this, but true to this. And he actually got caught making those supplications, and that's how he got thrown in the lion's den. Now, the phrase "and making supplication" is actually just one Hebrew word, hanan, which means to ask for favor. Which means that Daniel saw the plan of the enemy before it even happened, and he was asking for favor in that situation when they came and got him. And we know that Matthew 7, verses 7 to 8 tells us that what we ask for, we shall receive. Proverbs 3, verse 3 tells us that truth and mercy, when it's bound around our neck and engraved upon our hearts, that we have favor amongst God and man. And we see that showing out in this story of Daniel in the lion's den, because not only did he have favor from God, but he had favor from the one man that could actually help a bit, and that was the King Darius. And King Darius stayed up all throughout the night trying to figure out how he could help Daniel. And he actually couldn't do much at that moment. And that's because the one king, the King of Kings, the one who's in charge of all, was the one who was going to do all the work and get the glory for this. However, he, being Daniel, was on the king's mind. And right when they were about to throw him in the lion's den, he actually prophesied to him. If you go and read the story, he said, "Your God, whom you continually serve, he will deliver you." He didn't just say that he might deliver you, or I hope he would deliver you. He said he will deliver you. The story gets even better, showing the favor that Daniel had with God and man, because after Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, the sleep was actually taken away from the king, and he fasted and was thinking about Daniel all night. And the next morning, he quickly came to Daniel and cried out, "Daniel, servant of the living God." And he wanted to make sure he was fine, of course, in which Daniel responded, and he found out afterwards that he was unharmed and that an angel shut his mouth. What you can't miss is that he said, "Daniel, servant of the living God." This makes two things likely. Either Daniel told him himself who he served, or God told him, because he was king of this Persian empire that were deeply rooted in things that were not of God. In fact, he had already signed up that people are to serve him, worship him essentially. So this wasn't his God, at that moment, but he knew he was the living God. And once Daniel came out unscathed, the king then made a new decree that said that everyone in that nation is to fear and tremble before the Lord of Daniel, that he is the true living God. And he goes on to say in Daniel 6:26-27, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of lions. So while Daniel faced some serious consequences for praying to the Lord, God was ultimately glorified and his kingdom message grew as a result of Daniel standing on his godly convictions. And the reality is God could have easily removed Daniel from ever facing that to begin with. God could have prevented Daniel from even going into the lion's den. But in doing so, none of those other things would have happened. The king would not have put a decree out if that was the case. His message would not have grown, and he would not have been glorified in the way that he was when Daniel actually had to face the peril of that decision. So the questions we have to ask ourselves are these. Are we willing to go through the trial if it means that God's going to get the ultimate glory? Are we willing to get uncomfortable for a bit if it means that the kingdom message will grow? Will we stand by our God when the world is pointing us a different way? When the world around us is shaking, will we refuse to be stirred? I pray this message blessed you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.